The Petrodollar agreement is a foundational element of the dollar's reserve status. Recent news stories have circulated the web claiming the Petrodollar agreement has ended and the US dollar is under threat. But how true is that, and what should we expect going forward? If you follow our channel, you'll know we've covered the de-dollarization trend occurring globally a few times. The petrodollar has been identified as one of the primary arrangements supporting the dollar's use globally, and if the petrodollar agreement ended, it could potentially accelerate de-dollarization. We want to make sure everyone is on the same page, so we're going to cover what these things are first and why they matter. Then we'll talk about what's really going on with the petrodollar agreement, because there is something going on, but it's probably not what most people think. Let's start with de-dollarization. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency, and that's partially because Saudi Arabia struck an informal agreement with the US back in the 70s to only sell oil for US dollars. The dollar was already the world's reserve currency at the time, established at the end of World War II, but this arrangement solidified its status. Since everyone needs oil, everyone needs US dollars. This is how the US finances its debt. In exchange, the Saudis get defense assurances from the US military. Now lately, with the US imposing sanctions, the world is looking for alternatives to the US dollar, and this is what de-dollarization is all about. The concern is that if the US could sanction anyone and turn off their ability to use dollars, as the US did with Russia, then there's a perceived risk to sovereignty. The petrodollar agreement has been highlighted as a cornerstone of the dollar's reserve currency status. If the dollar loses that status, one would expect the dollar to weaken greatly and for goods and services produced overseas to become much, much more expensive. This would lead to persistently higher inflation, which is one reason that gold bugs are watching developments around de-dollarization initiatives very carefully. But let's be clear about two things. First, the petrodollar agreement has not expired and failed to renew. It was always something of an informal arrangement that has benefited both the US and Saudi Arabia greatly over the decades. Second, it's unlikely the Saudis are truly attempting to end the agreement despite some apparent moves in that direction. The Saudis have been nurturing the perception they will start accepting other currencies than the US dollar in exchange for sales of oil, and this has been going on for more than just a few weeks. Some of their original statements and actions have drawn concern from US officials. Quoting Monica Crowley, who served as assistant to the US Treasury Secretary, "If the petrodollar were to end, that would mean the end of the US dollar. If Saudi Arabia decides to join with America's enemies here and start trading oil in different currencies, that is going to undermine the entire global economic system." This statement was made last year as it became clear tensions were mounting between the Biden administration and the Saudis. But the main thrust of the recent articles surrounding the petrodollar agreement ending are not rooted in reality. The source of the claims have come from cryptocurrency websites, an industry riddled with scams and pump and dump schemes. An article claiming the petrodollar agreement expired and was not renewed was fabricated, likely out of a desire to drive more people to adopt crypto. To be clear, Saudi Arabia is making overtures to other nations. They have stated publicly they would consider accepting other nations' currencies in exchange for oil. They have also joined BRICS, and the BRICS coalition has a stated goal of de-dollarization. So while the main thrust of the article was false, it did have some slivers of truth to it, and just enough to sound plausible. But we're talking about international politics here, so some context is needed. First, the US and the Saudis have a complicated relationship. The Biden administration attempted to take a tough stance with Saudi Arabia over a high-profile assassination of a journalist, but eventually backed down. Then in 2022, a secret arrangement between the Biden administration and the Saudis to maintain a certain level of oil production fell through and became public, causing some embarrassment. And currently, the US and the Saudis are discussing a defense agreement. The Saudis have indicated with recent actions they are well positioned to bargain with the US. In exchange for favorable security guarantees against Iran, the Saudis could maintain the status quo, on trading oil for dollars and reinvesting those dollars into US investments like treasuries. If the defense agreement does not meet the Saudis' standards, they can use the threat of de-dollarization as a bargaining chip. As further evidence of this, since this story has spread like wildfire, the Saudis have declined to clarify their stance. The ambiguity benefits them in negotiations. So while de-dollarization is undoubtedly occurring, the Saudis do have a unique position to either stall it or encourage it. But as for current claims, the Petrodollar agreement is over and the dollar is done, we think it's a bit early to call for its demise. If the Saudis do break away from the petrodollar entirely and move to a new currency, that could be a catalyst for some dramatic events. Gold and silver would likely increase in value. Or put another way, the dollar's purchasing power would likely decrease, meaning one would need more dollars to buy an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver. It's two ways of saying the same thing, but the headline is that the dollar's purchasing power could take a severe hit, and the US could be in trouble when attempting to borrow debt. It's hard to say what kind of timeline we're looking at or how much gold or silver could rise in the event the petrodollar agreement became moot, and it may never come to pass. For those who believe it's inevitable, the Saudis will make the leap. Consider first the collateral damage. The Saudis' currency, the rial, is pegged to the US dollar. They have an economic interest in maintaining the current arrangement, as a weakening dollar would lead to a weakening rial. We think it's more likely that de-dollarization will continue its slow march, and gold will continue to gain ground as the US dollar weakens, debt accrues, and inflation persists. That's all we have for you today. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.